Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about job hunting, running a business, starting a business, building wealth, all of the financial aspects of life. And so today, I'm touching on a subject that it certainly applies to our finances, since statistics are so often used to get us to act in a particular way that we might not act if we understood the statistics better. But indeed, this is something that I think affects our lives beyond our financial lives, and it's one of my personal bugaboos, I guess, and that is, and I read this book quite a long time ago. It was originally written in 1954. That's how long this problem has been recognized, and it's called "How to Lie with Statistics" by Darrell Huff. So the fact of the matter is that you may have heard the expression, there are lies, darn lies, and statistics. And it seems like increasingly statistics are used to hide the truth as often as they are to expose it. And that's unfortunate. We live in a very data-driven society, or a seemingly data-driven society. I'm not sure how data-driven our society actually is, but we have numbers and statistics thrown at us all the time, and yet, and it's taken for granted, I think, that we're going to accept them, and yet, oftentimes, those numbers and statistics do more to obscure the situation, obscure the truth, than they do to reveal it. And so Darrell Huff, who, again, wrote this book, now it's been 71 years ago, right? So his point was not to advocate for us to ignore statistics. Really, it was the book advocates for us to think critically when we're faced with statistics, to see if what we're being told actually has any validity at all. And he identifies a number of, I guess, issues, if you will, that we should be aware of which we should be aware, so that we're not fooled by statistics and fooled by numbers. And so I'm going to talk about those today, and give you some examples of just sort of common ways that statistics are manipulated or presented in a way that actually misleads rather than informs, so that you can get a sense of what I hope will be like something in the back of your mind will say to you when you hear a statistic. Well, wait, before I believe this statistic, what do I really need to know, or how do I need to examine it, so that I'm not fooled into believing something that isn't true. So this is designed, I think, to raise some skepticism. Now, I'm a bit of a skeptic. I think I don't know if it's by nature. I don't know if such a thing exists, or maybe it's just how I was raised, to be a little bit contrary, if you will. But I think there is some benefit to not accepting the things we're told these days at face value, unless we're very, very sure of the source And we're also sure that the source has, done his own work in terms of making sure that, that he's, thought these issues through. So there's, I believe, I think I put together 8 main points. Yeah, 8 main points from the book. So I'm going to go through them one by one, so you can see the ways that statistics are used to lie. There's just no plainer way of saying it than that. So the first one is what's called sampling bias. Okay, and the reality is, if a sample is not representative of the whole population, the results are meaningless. Now, when a reputable polling group, for example, Gallup, does a survey, or say the Pew Center, one of the things they spend a great deal of time on is developing a sample of a size and composition that is reflective of whatever more generalized group they want to gain insight into. Okay, so it takes a lot of time and energy to do this. So I remember when I was in the Navy, we had a conference of all the chaplains in, I think, sort of the Southern California area. There were maybe 20 of us there. And this one particular chaplain had recently done what he said was a survey that showed certain things about sailors in the Navy more broadly. So the first question I asked him was, well, how did you develop your sample size? Or how did you develop your sample, I mean? And he said, well, I just took a survey of the sailors in my command. I said, well, what is your basis for concluding that the sailors in your command are representative of the Navy as a whole? And he says, well, my wife does this all the time. I said, oh, well, okay, fine. I said, so then what is your wife's basis for concluding that the sailors in your unit are representative of the Navy as a whole? And then he just got mad at me. And here's the problem. He was trying to make generalized statements based on just the sailors within his command that obliged him by filling out his survey. So there's a couple of problems with that. One is, and I don't remember what community he was in, but let's say he was in the construction battalion community. So those sailors are very different than sailors in the surface Navy, and sailors in aviation, and sailors in special warfare. So just because it's true of the sailors in the Seabees doesn't mean it would necessarily be true of sailors in some other community in the Navy. That's number one. Number two, younger sailors who may be single, okay, are likely to have a very different outlook than sailors who are married, or sailors who are married and have children, or sailors who are single parents, or sailors who are just older, closer to retirement, sailors who are enlisted people versus whether you call officers sailors or just officers, then officers, sailors who like and respect chaplains versus those who don't. I mean, it's, dirty little secret, I guess, in the military, there are quite a number of people in the military who think that there should not be chaplains in the military. They view that as a violation of the so-called separation of church and state, right? So there was no time spent validating his sample, and so therefore his conclusions were useless. Okay, his findings were useless. So he had what could be considered a non-random sample, or there could have been self-selection bias. So the people who responded were the ones who liked him and trusted him. And so that's built into the survey. And knowing that they liked and trusted him, they may have answered the questions in the survey with an eye to, what would this chaplain want me to say? Okay. So the fact of the matter is, anytime we see a survey, the first question we should ask is, how was the sample constructed, right? So here's an example. I used ChatGPT to come up with some examples that were just kind of generic, but easy to understand. So a luxury watch brand surveys only its newsletter subscribers and reports 92% of our customers would recommend our watches. Can you see the problem with this? So it's the people who have already said we like your watches that were surveyed. So of course they're going to get 92% of them recommending them, right? I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise to hear 100% of them did, right? I mean, but it's obviously going to be, these are people who have already expressed a liking for this particular product. It shouldn't be any surprise that the number is so high. But that says nothing about how people in general like watches, right? So therein lies, that's like saying, it would be like, for Apple Watch, if they surveyed only Apple Watch owners, 92% of Apple Watch owners like our product or would recommend our product. Well, sure we would, because it's self-validating if other people buy something that we already have. That says nothing about, the whole universe of Fitbit owners and other smart watch owners, who many of whom detest Apple Watch for various reasons. I know I have a friend who does. He owns one, but he still detests. He detests all things Apple. But anyway, you can see there's an inherent bias in the sample, and so therefore its claim is meaningless. So whenever we hear of a survey, we should always ask, who was surveyed and how was the sample selected? If we don't know those two things, we probably should discount whatever that survey is claiming. Okay, so that's the first point. The next point is misleading averages. So there are, generally speaking, three types of averages. There's what's called the mean, which is typically what we think of when we hear the word average. And I'll explain how each of these are calculated in a moment. There's the mean, the median, and the mode. Okay, so the mean, if you remember this from, I think, elementary school math class or maybe junior high, with a mean, we take all the items in the group, add them up, and then divide by the number of items. So let's just take a real simple example. Let's say we have a group of figures 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If we add them together, that's 1 and 2 is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 4 is 10, plus 5 is 15. We divide by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. The mean is 3. Okay, that's what we typically call the average. Okay, we added all the figures together, divided by the number of figures. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 added together 15 divided by 5 gives us 3. Now, the median is if we put the figures in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's the one that's equidistant from the highest and the lowest figure. Now, interestingly enough, in this sample, 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 3. 3 is in the middle. So the median and the mean are the same. Okay. So the median is the one that's in the middle of the sample when they're ordered highest to lowest or lowest to highest. Okay. The mode is the item that appears most frequently. So in this sample of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there really is no mode because they all appear once. But if we had a sample that was 1, 2, 3, 3, 5, The mode would be 3. By the way, so would the median. Now, the mean would be 14 divided by 5, which would be like, instead of 3, it would be like 2.9 or something like that, or 2.8. But you can see in this case, because the sample is kind of evenly distributed, the mean, the median, and the mode are all pretty much the same. Okay. Now, here's where it gets dicey. Oftentimes, when someone is using statistics to try and make a point or sell us something, okay, they will choose which of these to use that best makes their case, as opposed to the one that is most descriptive of the actual situation. Okay, so whether someone chooses the mean, median, or mode can change pretty dramatically the results. So, for example, the CEO of a company says, our employees on average earn a salary of $120,000. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Now, that's probably because, or that may be because, if you take the mean, you get $120,000. And that's because you'll have the senior executive earning huge salaries, maybe $2 million plus a year. But then most of the staff earn salaries of maybe 60,000 to 80,000. So what happens is this group with the super huge salaries at the top, they pull the mean up from, to $120,000, even though if you were to look at the median salary, because so many people earn between 60 and 80,000, the median is really more like $70,000, because maybe you have 10 people earning 2 million plus, but then you have 30 or 40 people earning 60 to 80,000. So while it may be numerically accurate to say that our employees earn on average $120,000, it's really misleading, because on average, the median average is $70,000, and that's much more descriptive of what people at the company actually make, because most make between 60 and 80. So do you see how in this case a misleading average is being used to hide the situation, not to bring light to it, so to speak? Okay, so the mean can be skewed by outliers. The median oftentimes tells a much clearer story. So that's why, for example, when we talk, generally speaking, when the Federal Reserve Bank and other organizations do studies of home prices, they talk about the median home price, because otherwise the multi tens of millions and even hundreds of millions of dollar valued homes skews what is a truer picture of the home price market in the country. Okay, even in a state like California, where we do have a lot of high priced homes, or New York, still median tends to be much more reflective of the actual market as average people like you and I experience it. Okay. Whereas if we were to take the mean, or what's usually meant when people say the average, that would skew it higher. Hey, we do the same thing with median income. So, be wary when you hear about average income, okay? Because the fact of the matter is, there are people in this country who make enormous incomes, and not necessarily every year, but they may have an enormous income in a particular year. Let's say they sell their business, and so now they sold their business for $10 million or $100 million, and all of a sudden so that huge income increase for them that year, those kinds of outliers tend to skew income up. Okay. And so therefore, mean income or average income is not as descriptive as median income. By the way, we see this on the lower side as well, right? So for people in the bottom quintile, the lowest 20% of income earners, okay, most income statistics do not include government benefits they receive. Okay, so the income that's reported for them, which may be zero. Okay, that if we went by the mean, would tend to pull things down, because again, those are outliers. The reality is, if their income were reported more accurately, and there are people who make up to $65,000 a year through various government benefit programs. If that were included in the statistics, mean or median, we would see that the lowest quintile is actually doing about as well as the upper second quintile. Okay, so again, we need to be very careful about when we're hearing averages. How were those averages constructed? Is it a mean? Is it a median? Is it a mode? Okay, and be skeptical, when we're looking at those average figures. So again, with misleading averages, anytime we hear an average, the question should be which average is being used and why. Okay. All right. Next, small sample sizes. So small sample sizes can lead to exaggerated results, because there really isn't any randomness there, or there may be so much randomness there it's completely meaningless. Okay, this is kind of related to sampling bias, but now what's happening is the sample is so small that whatever result is being reported is as likely to be a statistical fluke as it is to be valid. Okay, so that's why when reputable surveying firms, like I said, I mentioned Gallup, they spend a tremendous amount of time on both the size and the composition of the sample size for a survey, because it's in those two factors that the validity of the survey will rest. Now, it may seem amazing that in a country of, I think the United States has got 360 million, 370 million people in it, we can have a survey of, I think, 15,000 people that would be representative of the country. Okay, but just keep in mind that survey is, if it's done by an organization like Gallup, is very carefully constructed. Okay, and so while we're talking here about small sample sizes, small, it's somewhat relative. So 15,000, which would be, less than 0.1% of our population, nonetheless, that's still a pretty large sample size, and could very well be statistically valid for a nationwide survey. Okay. On the other hand, when we're dealing with truly small numbers, okay, let's say a startup, there's a startup and it says, our app increases productivity by 40% in a recent trial. Okay, but if you dig deeper, their trial had 5 users, all of them were members of the team that developed the app. So the sample size is too small and biased to draw any kind of generalized conclusions. Okay, so again, anytime we hear about some kind of statistic, like a recent survey showed, blah 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 blah, the first thought that should come in our head is, What was the sample? How big was it? How was it constructed? Okay. All right. Next, percentages and probabilities. So Darrell Huff shows that percentages can be manipulated to sound more dramatic. Okay, so for example, you'll hear sometime like this. There's a 50% increase in risk from doing the following. Okay, but that could mean going from 2 people out of 1,000 to 3 people out of 1,000, right? So yes, going from 2 to 3 people is a 50% increase in terms of the people affected, but 3 people out of 1,000 is still 0.3% people affected versus 0.2%. In other words, it's not alarming at all that there was a 50% increase. Okay. So one needs, again, whenever we hear a percentage, one needs to be okay, but how was the percentage calculated? Okay. So you'll hear like like a skincare company might say, our product reduces wrinkles by 50%. First of all, what does that even mean? Does it mean 50% less wrinkles, so there was 20 here and now there's only 10? Or does it mean, the wrinkles were 0.2 millimeters deep or 0.02 millimeters deep, and now they're 0.01 millimeters deep, and so now they're reduced by 50%? I mean, these things are oftentimes just completely meaningless. So anytime we hear a statistic expressed as a percentage, the first thing we need to do is say, okay, but what are the numbers behind the percentages, right? And why are they using percentages instead of telling me the actual numbers? Okay. So, there used to be a famous commercial when I was a kid for Crest. I think it was Crest toothpaste. 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed preferred Crest, right? I always thought that was really impressive when I was a kid because we used Crest toothpaste. I'm thinking, wow, 4 out of 5 dentists. Okay, well, we're really doing the right thing. I mean, what does that mean? How many dentists did they talk to? Did they talk to 10, and 8 out of 10 dentists preferred Crest, right? And in which case the thousands of other dentists weren't even consulted. So we've got too small a sample size for it to be, relevant, or, and what does it mean that they preferred Crest, right? So did they prefer Crest over, I don't know, baking soda? You know what I'm saying? This is how they, right? Did they prefer it over Colgate and Pepsodent, the actual competitors to Crest? Or did they prefer it over not brushing at all or brushing with no toothpaste, right? So there's all kinds of ways that percentages and probabilities can be manipulated, and we need to be skeptical when we hear them. Okay, next, graphical distortions. So oftentimes charts and graphs are used to manipulate us visually rather than inform us. So one of the ways this is done most often is, and if you can picture a graph where you have the y-axis and the x-axis, if you remember how those work, right? And you have some line like this or whatever, right? So depending on the scale of the axes, that can very well determine what the results actually look like. Okay, so for example, if we want to show, higher growth, for example, so we can make the x-axis start at 95 instead of 0, right? And that can make it look like there was a huge, growth surge when in fact it was actually very, very little. Okay, so whenever you see a graph, the first thing to do is to look at, okay, what are the baselines of the graph? Okay, so check the scale of the presentation. If it's years, why did they use those particular years? Okay, why did they choose whatever digits, thousands, millions, whatever they chose to make, to be their scale. Why did they choose those particular numbers relative to the data presented? Okay. So again, always be skeptical when you see data presented in a chart, especially if it looks like, wow, that really makes the case right there. If it so clearly makes the case, that's the time when the alarm bells should be going off and saying, wait a minute, how might I be manipulated? Now, I will say, not all graphs are manipulative. So, okay, the idea here is to just help us take a pause, really understand what we're looking, and then draw our conclusions rather than just looking at it and immediately drawing our conclusions. Okay, next, causation versus correlations. This is I think this is my biggest bugaboo about statistics, is the implication that something that is correlative is causative. Okay, so the example I have here is, okay, ice cream sales in the summertime go up. It's hot, okay, in most places, and so ice cream is a wonderful food to eat when it's hot. Okay, also, drowning tends to go up in the summertime because it's hot, and swimming and being in the water is a pleasant way to get relief from the heat. Okay, so ice cream consumption or ice cream sales and drowning both increase in the summer, but ice cream doesn't cause drowning, nor does drowning cause ice cream sales to go up. Okay, they correlate, but they have no causation. They have no causative relationship at all. And we see that I see this abused, it seemingly all the time. So people will say to me, well, gosh, I'm trying to think of another example here on the fly. They'll say to me, um, God, it's not coming to me. Okay. So here's another one. Here's another example I've got. Okay. So, and the point here, by the way, is that two things can be related without one causing the other. Okay. So, a marketing report shows that customers who visit a company's website also spend more in store. Okay. So then they conclude, therefore, our website causes higher sales. Well, maybe, but maybe it's just that people who go on the website are already predisposed to buy more. Okay, the website has nothing to do with it. It's just they're they're more engaged overall, and so they go on the website. But the website may have nothing to do with it. It may be a correlative relationship, but not a causative relationship. Okay, so da, 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 da. I had another example in my head and now it's gone away. Oh well. Okay, hopefully it'll come back to me while I'm talking about the next one. Okay, but at any time that you hear that something causes something else, okay, stop right then. Far fewer things are causative than are just correlative. Okay, and that's where we need to make the separation. So anytime you hear, X causes Y, be wary. Okay, on what basis was that conclusion drawn? Merely because it's like ice cream consumption and drowning, they both go up in summer. Okay, completely invalid in terms of causation. Okay, or is it that uh, you know, um, someone who has a headache and takes Advil, their headache tends to go away. Okay, so it's probably the Advil. There's a good chance that the Advil caused the headache to go away or reduce. Why? Because ibuprofen, which is the active ingredient in Advil, causes the physiological response that causes pain to go away. Okay. Now it does some other things, like it also tends to cause liver problems. Okay, just like acetaminophen, Tylenol. Acetaminophen is the active ingredient in Tylenol that tends to cause stomach problems, especially if you don't take it with food, right? So those are causative. Now, there was, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars spent on developing these drugs and testing them and seeing whether they're efficacious in their causative claims, okay, as well as in their negative effects, right? So we can be relatively sure that in those cases causation is in fact present, okay. But so I remember it seemed like every time I took, I think it was ibuprofen, I gained weight. I happened to mention that to my doctor one time, and he said, "Yeah, ibuprofen is not causing weight gain. There's no basis there that may correlate, and it may be that when at the times when you take ibuprofen, okay, you're doing something else that's causing you to gain weight, but it's not the ibuprofen." Right? And he says, so don't refrain from taking ibuprofen when you need to because you're concerned about weight gain. Those two are not causatively related. They're only correlated. Okay. So, and we get these things in our heads that something causes something else when in fact that is not true in the least. Okay. Next, what Huff calls the semi-attached figure. Okay, so the trick involves using a statistics that's technically true, but it's irrelevant. So a product will say, such and such, or an advertisement, I mean, will say such and such a product is used by doctors, okay? And it doesn't say how many or in what context. So who cares? I mean, doctors are, in my experience, generally speaking, nice people and all of that, but who cares, right? So you see this, for example, in vitamin advertisements. So a company that sells vitamin C will say something like, vitamin C is essential for immune health. Okay. And our supplement contains 100 milligrams of vitamin C. Okay. Well, so they're right about vitamin C. It appears that vitamin C does improve immune health. But just because their product includes vitamin C, that doesn't mean that their product is effective, because it may not have enough vitamin C to support immune health, number one. And number two, it may not be any more effective than any other product that contains vitamin C. So the statement is essentially irrelevant. Okay, okay, yes, part A of the statement is true, but that doesn't mean part B of the statement is true. That's why they call it the semi-attached figure. So part of it is true, and they try and connect them together, but they're not really connect. So whenever you see a claim like that, the trick is to think, does the statistic actually prove the point that's being claimed? Okay, so again, and you see this in supplements all the time. Supplements make all kinds of claims, but if you start digging below the surface, you actually see that for many supplements, there's been no hardcore studies done to support the claims that are being made. Okay, there may have been some study of it, but not enough to actually determine a causative relationship. Okay, so again, when you hear these kind of things, look at them critically. You know, does the first part really have anything to do with the second part? Okay, and then finally, the eighth point that Huff makes in his book is what's called post hoc tricks and cherry picking. So this is a situation where data is used selectively to support a conclusion. Okay, so for example, and this is, now there are laws to try and prevent this, but it's very difficult to literally outlaw this kind of thing. So you may see some kind of investment, and they may say, we've averaged 12% returns since 2015, 12% annual returns since 2015. That sounds really good. 12%. That's a good return, okay? No matter what, okay? What they neglect to do is include 2014, when the investment lost, 50%. So if you looked at the average from 2014 to today, the investment might have averaged more like, 5% or something like that. So by cherry picking the data, the person using the statistic is able to present a picture in line with what he wants, but not one that's accurate with what's actually going on. Okay, so again, anytime you see data, and especially data tied to a time period, the question should be, why that time period? Now, one of the ways that the SEC has tried to avoid this kind of cherry picking is to require organizations promoting investments to quote investment returns for certain specific time periods: 1 year, 5 year, 15 years. Well, that's all good and well, but 1 year, 5 year, 15 years, maybe everything has gone really well with that investment for the last 15 years. But if you went 20 years back, it did terribly, right? So again, even with the laws in place, that doesn't mean that the statistics aren't cherry picked, at least somewhat. Now, they may have been cherry picked by the SEC in this case, which you could argue is even worse than the promoter cherry picking it. But in any event, and again, there's no law that you could pass a law saying you must report statistics in a way that's meaningful to the performance of the investment. Okay, great, but that's, of course, meaningful is someone in the eye of the beholder. So we as consumers need to look at all the data. So if a particular, let's take a mutual fund. Okay, maybe that mutual fund has been around for 30 years. So then, from my perspective, the relevant time period for analyzing that mutual fund is 30 years, right? That's how long it's been around. And over 30 years, there's been enough market fluctuation, okay, to give us a true picture of the market. Now, if a mutual fund has only been around for a few years, well, you could look at all of the data for the mutual fund, but that's not going to, if the market has been very good for the last few years. So the fact that we're looking at the entire history of that mutual fund tells us nothing about how it's going to perform in a potential down market, right? So again, we need to be intelligent consumers. We need to be intelligent viewers of statistics with which we're being presented in order to protect ourselves. So to sort of summarize again, Darrell Huff's book is about developing critical thinking, and it's a very, by the way, it's a very witty book. Just 144 pages long, so you can read it in one sitting easily. I'll put a link to the book in the show notes. It will, of course, be a a paid link, so that if you click through, I get, whatever it is, 5 cents if you buy the book or something like that. But I highly recommend the book. And just to cover again, the various main points of the book. So sampling bias, misleading averages, small sample sizes, percentages and probabilities, graphical distortions, causation versus correlation, the semi-attached figure, and finally, post hoc tricks and cherry picking. These are all ways that statistics are manipulated in a way to convince us to do something that may not necessarily be in our best interest. And so we need to be skeptical consumers, skeptical investors, to make sure that what we're being told actually has validity. Right. And especially when we look at wealth building, when we're looking at investments, like the final example I gave with the mutual funds, we need to be, in spite of all the regulation, we need to be very cautious and careful investors in order to make sure that we're making the best decisions possible for ourselves and our families. So I thank you very much for joining me today, and especially my live guests. Thanks for tuning in live. And this is my last show for this week. And so I will be back next week on Monday at 10 a.m. with Trust and Estates Weekly, 10 a.m. Pacific time, that is. Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And my guest is going to be Jason Hollander. He a Marine Corps veteran and now an M&A advisor. So looking forward to talking to Jason about how his time in the Marine Corps has informed his practice working with mergers and acquisitions. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m. next week is our once a month show, Economic Echoes. And we're going to, this is when we look at all kinds of statistics. So today's show is a good preparation for next week's show, People Making Money, at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then finally, next week on Thursday is my every other Thursday show at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Jiggers' Place. We're going to have a cocktail, and we're going to talk about some great books. I'm going to talk about 3 of my all-time favorite authors from the 19th century, Jane Austen, George Eliot, and Thomas Hardy. Among the books that they wrote, Jane Austen is Northanger Abbey, not one of her best known. Probably her best known is either Sense and Sensibility, or gosh, what's her other well-known one? I tend to like her lesser known books. George Eliot, author of such books as Daniel Deronda, and I think he also, it's actually a she, it's George Eliot, but that's a pseudonym for a female author. Mill on the Floss, I think, is also Daniel Deronda. And then Thomas Hardy, Jude the Obscure, Tess of the Dubervilles. Marvelous books, all extremely entertaining with a lot of life lessons in them. So join me for a cocktail and a schmooze about books next Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And so now it just leaves me to wish you a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week. And to sign off, as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.